It's 6:45. So I now call the October 17th, 2023 special meeting of the City Council to order. Ms. Hoffman, if you can take roll, please.
Ms. Nicely?
Present.
Mr. Cahill? Ms. Kyle?
Here.
Mr. Skidmore? Here. Mr. Hermes?
Here.
Ms. Skidmore? Here. Ms. Reckers?
Here.
Ms. Jasper Lucas?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
Okay, thank you. Only item on the agenda tonight is legislation. Mr. Gatlin.
This is an ordinance of the City of Erlanger in Kenton County, Kentucky, amending Erlanger ordinance numbers 2542, 2543, 2548, and 2554, and the budget adopted thereby for the City of Erlanger for the fiscal year beginning on July 1, 2022, and ending on June 30th, 2023. As was discussed by Ms. Kramer at a prior meeting, this is a bit of a housekeeping issue to line everything up for the audit. You can see attached is the spreadsheet where the items that have been changed have been struck through, and the number next to it is the new item. This is a second reading.
All right, do I entertain a motion that we adopt this ordinance as read? Mr. Hermes, Ms. Reckers, any discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Skidmore? Yes. Ms. Reckers?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Nicely?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Wilson? Yes. Ms. Jasper Lucas?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Kyle?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Skidmore?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, motion carried. Do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Reckers, Ms. Kyle, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We will be back at 7 o'clock. All right. It is 7 o'clock. We'll call the City Council caucus meeting to order. First and only item on the agenda this evening for discussion is the Resilience Fund. Councilman Tyson Hermes, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Sometimes late at night, I think about our ordinances. That's how exciting my life is. And I was thinking about the resilience ordinance, and I was thinking about what would it take for us to have to use this ordinance. The city has emergency funds, we have reserves. If we have insurance, if we were to exhaust all of those, I assume that's when we would kick in this resilience fund. Nothing says it would have to be used then. I mean, it could be used sooner. But primarily, I was thinking about Section 4. It starts with paragraph 4 of Section 4. The minimum level of the resilience fund balance is $5 million. And then in paragraph 6, it says, any proposed appropriation resulting in the balance of the resilience fund dropping below the established minimum fund balance must be submitted with a plan to restore the minimum resilience fund within 2 years. So I tried to start thinking then, if we had to exhaust the resilience fund of $5 million, what type of plan could we put together that would generate $5 million in 2 years, so $2.5 million per year? And I thought about that, and I could not come up with any kind of answer. I think we've created almost an impossibility. And either the amount probably doesn't need to be $5 million, or we need to allow more time to restore it. So if we restored it in, say, 10 years, I think that would be, feasible. Or if we reduced it down to, say, $2 million, one or the other. I love the resilience fund. I love everything behind it. I love, it's nice to have that almost like extra insurance, but I don't like having an amount of money that can't be used. And I think we've made kind of almost a legal gridlock or a legislative gridlock of a chunk of money that has been taken from our residents through taxes and then cannot be touched, even if we did need it. So I wanted to open it up to council. While I might not be able to think of a way that we can generate $5 million in 2 years, doesn't mean that there's not a way to do it. I wanted to open it up to council and get any kind of other ideas that council might have on how we could restore that fund. Thank you.
I got Vicki and Jennifer. Either one.
Well, I personally can't imagine trying to get $5 million in 2 years. I just didn't really think about it when we passed the ordinance, but when Mr. Hermes challenged us with that question, I'm like, well, government aid, grants, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, no, because those would come if you had an emergency. The government would give you aid, or you could get a grant for certain things, but $5 million, I don't know. I mean, I thought when we first did this that we were doing it because we were afraid the economy would take a downturn. And then in that particular case, we might need this money to spend on roads, especially Stevenson Road, or we might need some police cars or fire emergency cars or public works, and we would always have that money there. We could spend it for that purpose. But I really think that it's become clouded now. It's like, and I told Mr. Hermes, I says, I have no idea how you're going to get to pay that back in 2 years. To me, that seems an impossible task. So I don't have any ideas. Hopefully somebody does.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So Vicki, just to clarify, we're not responsible for Stevenson Road. It's a state road.
We do have a dollar amount that we've committed to the state.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, ultimately, it's not our road to necessary. I just want to clarify that. I understand what her point is,
You got
that
it.
there are lots of roads that we do have to take care of, and we might need it for that, but Stevenson is a state road. I don't think anything in the ordinance says we have to spend all the $5 million. And you guys are referring to this as if we'd have to replace $5 million. We might not. We might only need 500,000 of it. We might not need 5 million. So hopefully we don't. But I don't want us to focus on how do we replace 5 million if that's not the amount that we've actually taken out of it. So here's my ideas for replacing any funds that come out of it. First of all, the plan to replace the funds from the plan to replace funds spent from the resilience fund will be somewhat dependent on the reason for taking the money out. For example, if our revenues decrease due to a large business leaving Erlanger and there's a need to use money from the resilience fund, not necessarily all 5 million, before another business moves into Erlanger, the plan would probably be to replace the funds with revenues from the new business coming in. If the need for funds is due to some type of natural disaster, the plan to replace the funds may be completely different. That may come through federal government aid. You know, we did receive aid through COVID, and if we knew that was going to happen, then we could say that was part of the plan. But I'm the last person that wants to count on the Fed to give us money. That's just not how I like to operate. So I wouldn't necessarily expect that, but if we knew it was coming, that could be part of the plan. I would not be in favor of increasing taxes on residents and businesses that had just gone through some type of natural disaster. However, that may be necessary to do at some point. The other thing I want to point out about increasing taxes is, you know, let's say something happened in, I don't know, tornado seasons, August, September. Let's say we had a massive tornado that went through Erlanger in September. We wouldn't be able to increase property taxes until the next year. We'd also have a budget to pass in between then, and maybe we reduce spending in the budget. So I'm going to get to that a little bit more in a second about, well, that is actually what's next on my notes. We would also look at reducing spending as a plan to, quote, pay back what was taken from the resilience fund. I realize and I completely recognize that we already operate pretty lean, but we could find places to cut if necessary. $250,000 from 4 different areas would be $1 million. And $250,000 from 4 different areas of government isn't necessarily that much. That may mean not paying counsel. That may mean not attending some optional trainings for some folks. It may look like doing 2 leaf pickups in the fall instead of 4. Maybe it means not improving some parks like we do every year. Maybe it means using a few police cars another year than we originally planned. Those aren't things we do under normal circumstances, but those are things you do under special circumstances, and it's the same thing that most families and businesses are having to deal with right now, because when they go to the grocery store, they're spending a lot more on groceries, and they're spending a lot more on gas, and they're figuring it out, most of them. They're getting lean where they can, and that's what we would do. We would get lean, and we would figure out a plan, and it's going to look different for every single scenario in which we would need to spend that money. I do have one question for Mr. Hermes before somebody else jumps in, and this can be answered later when everybody else is finished presenting their plan, but it appears that you are desperate to get this money back, and I want to know what you want to spend it on.
Do you want to answer, or do you want me to continue on with other people's?
Yeah, I'd say, I think by Robert's Rules of Order, everybody gets a chance to talk.
Cool. Who's next? Diana? Renee? Tom? Rebecca?
I have similar sentiments to Ms. Jasper Lucas. When we established the Resilience Fund, and I'll read this, it was for the purpose of providing funds for an urgent event that affects the safety of the public. An example would be a declaration of economic emergency or other specific circumstances such as slow economic growth or a natural disaster such as flood or tornado for unexpected revenue declines that are projected to continue for more than 2 years. So that was the entire purpose of us doing this, is to have this fund, should we need it, should we have to wait for reimbursement from the federal government or FEMA, or have a sizable unexpected revenue decline. And it doesn't mean that we need to use all $5 million. I think that there's this fixation on the $5 million, like must use $5 million, or $5 million is the full scope. It could very easily be 1.5 million. We don't know. We don't know what the implication of Kroger leaving Erlanger and going to Edgewood is going to, how that's going to impact our budget. These are things that we should be looking at. And we have a lot of economic growth opportunity still left in Erlanger. So it's not that we're, as Mr. Hermes' email and purpose for continuing to have this dialogue about drumming up revenue, we're not done growing. So there's revenue to be made from growth as well. And I think that having a thoughtful, just strategic plan and looking at the forecasting opportunity here in Erlanger can help us at least get a better picture of what our future receivables could look like in a fully mature Erlanger. These are things that at least council has not been provided as part of, at least since 2021, we haven't received any projections. So I think there's a lot that goes into this. I think all of this is part of a sound fiscal policy, and we can sit here and go through every what-if scenario that it could possibly happen for the use of this $5 million. Or, I mean, Tyson, Mr. Hermes, you voted on this legislation, and now you want to poke holes in it. I feel like we've talked about this for almost 2 years as a governing body. 2 different councils have talked about this particular issue, and we finally passed a piece of legislation that is very thoughtful, and Kara worked very hard on making it appropriate from an accounting standpoint as well, to make this part of our fiscal policy. And we're poking holes in it now for what-if situations that may never occur. But at the end of the day, this is for the safety of the public and our residents, so that we're not having to look at increasing taxes or any sort of drastic measures. Our residents have been through enough. Everyone in America has been through enough lately with the rising inflation and impact to each of our households. I mean, I don't even want to entertain the thought of tax increases when we've got, finally, a policy in place to address the situation should something happen. Thank you.
Any other council? Tom?
So just to echo also what's been said already, having worked with government entities, having been involved with that, is in a natural disaster, once the state of Kentucky decides that they want help from the government, then it takes 72 hours for them to get boots on the ground, and that's for people to come and finish the paperwork that you get in order to get your money back. So COVID funds were kind of sent out pretty quickly, so having this type of money out there allows us to take care of expenses, allows us to take care of things while we're waiting on the government to get their stuff together in order to help us out. So once again, would we be 500,000? Would it be $1 million? Would it be $2 million? We have the ability to get that money back that way. So if we had a total collapse, I think we have more than worry about than just the city of Erlanger with something happening like that. But I will say that having had that experience with the federal government, it's a long time to get that money and to get that check. And when it takes that long to get that check, you want to make sure you have the funds there available to cover those things that you need to cover. If we had to do other things for that, we own a lot of property in the city of Erlanger too. That could be sold off. There's some other things that could be done. But once again, having this money for that emergency fund, that resilience fund, is very important when you're dealing with the feds. Thank you.
Anybody else? Don, Renee? All right. Mr. Hermes, everybody's been given the opportunity to speak once.
All right, thank you. I realize that we don't have to spend the $5 million. That's not my point. I'm not eager to spend that money. There's a big difference between not wanting to spend the $5 million or not spending the full $5 million and not being able to if we had to. That is my point. What I'm saying is that among the 9 council members here, nobody has a plan on how we can replace that money in 2 years. $5 million, replace in 2 years. Yeah, I mean, okay, so maybe I can't see the crystal ball of the future and know what the city's going to be bringing in revenue in 20 years from now, but what if we needed to use this next year? We don't have it. And if we can't operate currently under the ordinance that we just created, then I think something needs to be changed. My point is, saying that we're going to spend, if we're going to use $1 million and then pay that back in 4 areas of our budget by cutting $250,000 per area over 2 years and not paying council. I don't know what Ms. Jasper gets paid, but I don't get paid anywhere near enough to bring back $250,000. But not picking up leaves, getting lean, my whole point is that's not necessary if we make a change to one word in this ordinance. If we say that we're going to pay it back in 10 years, it's suddenly not such a burden. And we actually could, if we needed to, even in Mr. Cahill's scenario, if we needed to dip into that full $5 million, we would be able to, and be able to either get the funding from the federal government or the state of Kentucky or whatever it might be, disaster relief, to be able to pay that back in a quicker time. That would be great. But right now, there's no plan that our mayor can present that any of us can approve and say, yes, we're going by the guise of the ordinance here, and the mayor has proposed, now we're going to be dropping below the minimum $5 million, submitting a plan to restore that minimum balance within 2 years. None of us can approve anything because not a single one of us has an idea of how to use that. Now, if you come back and say, well, we don't plan on using the full $5 million, then don't make it $5 million. The amount of this fund doesn't need to be $5 million. It can be $1 million. If we can figure out a way to pay back $1 million, or if we can figure out a way to pay back $2 million, then let's make it that number. But if we can't figure out a way to pay back $5 million in 2 years, then one of those numbers should change, whether it's the amount of the fund or the payback period. That's all I'm saying. I'm not poking holes. That is a hole I'm poking, but that is one hole. And it's a legitimate hole. And if you have trouble admitting that every piece of legislation that we produce is not perfect, then this is probably not the right job. Because no matter how much we put stuff together and try to come up with every scenario and think of every thought, we don't We don't hit it. We never hit the mark. We're imperfect people. And it's worse when we force the legislation quickly. And that's why I asked multiple times to slow this down. That problem is exacerbated every time we force the legislation and steamroll it through as fast as we can. It never works well. Thank you, Mayor.
I just wanted to add, so the way that I have been thinking about this a lot is like a loan. Like if you're going to take a loan from a bank, say a mortgage, you're going to pay it over a certain period of time. And you got to be able to balance the number of years your payback is going to be with the dollar amount that you're actually taking. So if you're going to take $5 million, your payment over 2 years, you got to find $2.5 million each year to pay that back. So if you're doing $1 million, it's $500,000. So I'm just trying to logically think. There's a very big difference from taking $1 million to $3 million to $5 million over a 2-year period of time. And the payment plan, because technically if we do have to use this, it's like taking a loan from ourselves with the anticipation that we're paying it back into the resilience fund. So the dollar amount and the years associated with the dollar amount, I think, are pretty critical. And if we look at it on just that most simplest of terms, it becomes an impossibility. I mean, Jennifer, I agree with you. Like a 1 million or a 2 million, yeah, we could probably figure that out in a 2-year period of time. But if the 5 billion, which is the full amount, if that's required, I don't know how in the world we would do like $2.5 million each year. So that's where I would think, okay, if it does have to go up to a 5 million, then we have like 5 years to pay it back or something like that. Like there's got to be some kind of logical way to build this in the event you actually do need to use the full thing. Jennifer.
Thank you. Mr. Hermes does know how much I make because it's public, so I'm not sure where he got that from, but I make $329.30 after taxes every month being on council, and I realize that not paying 9 members of council isn't going to pay back $1 million. That wasn't my point. You're missing the point. The point is we have lots of things that we do that we could eliminate temporarily if we had to, and that's what we would do. That is a plan. You state that we have no option to operate under this ordinance, except that that's actually what we're doing right now. We are operating under the ordinance. We just voted to put the 5 million where it needs to be, and we are operating under it. So it's not impossible. We're doing it. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember everything that was stated. I just, you claim that nobody presented a plan. We all said it's very much going to depend on the reason for taking the money out. And as Ms. Recker said, we can sit here and play out every single what-if scenario, but I think we're doing what's best for the residents and the businesses of Erlanger by having the money there. Council clearly agrees with that because they voted for it. We did not rush this legislation. If anything, this legislation was probably the most discussed legislation that has existed since I've been on council. It was not rushed at all. The time period of 2 years is reflective of what other cities and states do throughout the country as far as paying this back. It's not like we just made all this up. This was very well thought out. So claiming that this was rushed is completely a lie. Claiming that we didn't have plans, also not true. And I'm so done talking about this. Council voted for it. Can we please stop talking about it?
Anybody else? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. All right, I see where we might have a problem here, math-wise. Let's start with 2 years, talking about this for 2 years. This was brought up September 6th, 2022. No. Nope. Nope. The concept was first brought up in December of 21. The legislation didn't get pushed until September 6, 2022. So that's 13 months. Okay, so again, to be clear, I asked council to come up with a plan to be able to replace $5 million in 2 years. That's what nobody has been able to answer. That's the question that still nobody's been able to answer. My recommendation, or, I think I would feel a lot better if we said that if it gets replaced in 10 years, I think that would be, if we're only going to use $500,000 and we can't replace it in 10 years, there's still $4.5 million sitting there. If we have to use $1 million of it, and I realize too, part of the problem with 10 years is that it's spanning multiple election cycles, and you're dealing with different people that are coming through here each time. So it's not ideal, but it's more palatable, I think. I'm less apt to want to reduce the amount. I think the $5 million is a good amount. Yeah, I would really not like to not reduce that, because I don't know where we should be putting that money. And I don't have any plans on how to use that money. So, if we could agree to making this change, to making it, and I'm open to other ideas, but again, I would say, whatever the time frame is that people suggest, we got to figure out how to replace the amount of the fund in the time that we have. And if we don't have that answer, then one of those numbers is wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Eckers.
So you're not accounting for a situation where, let's say we have a natural disaster that occurs and we do get insurance and FEMA reimbursement within 18 months, then that $5 million is repaid. How is that not true? If we had a situation where the city was presenting to council right now, are you agreeing? So I'm saying, so that $5 million isn't necessarily there for one particular type of disaster or use, but it gives a wide enough lens to be able to encompass multiple. And if we had a situation devastated our city, I'm sure the council at that time would do anything possible to extend that or nullify this legislation or do something. We have to improvise, adapt, and overcome in those situations. That's how we operate. We're not gonna dig our heels and say, well, nope, it says 24 months. Absolutely not. So we don't know what the future holds, but we do know that we have this money available, and that in the event that it needs to be used due to the litany of circumstances crafted in the ordinance, that it can be repaid.
Anybody else? Ms. Jasper Lucas.
I'm just throwing this out there. I don't know what anybody thinks about it. I'm not sure I completely agree with it. But I don't know if Mr. Hermes would feel better if maybe we said, this seems kind of more complicated than it needs to be, but what if we said for every $1 million that was spent, it was 2 years to pay it back? That way, if it was $5 million, we had 10 years. If it was $1 million, we had 2 years. But I'm also thinking about what Ms. Reckers just said, And I absolutely agree. If council felt that there was no way to repay that money within 5 years, they're going to make a change. I completely agree that none of our legislation is perfect. That's why we make changes to it sometimes. And we've seen that several times in the past year where we've had prior legislation that prior councils have passed that are not necessarily necessary anymore. And I think that future councils can be entrusted to say, okay, you know what? This ain't gonna work. 2 years ain't gonna work at this time in these circumstances. So we need more time. And so I don't know if 2 years per million is the right answer. I agree with what Ms. Recker said, that I think a future council can be trusted to make that call depending on what the situation is.
I love your idea. It makes a whole lot of sense, and having it tied to the dollar amount that's required for this emergency and the number of years extending, it just makes logical sense. And it makes me feel more comfortable as the mayor that would have to present the plan to you guys, that I could actually come up with a plan to make that happen. So, I mean, that's really the sticking point. How do I create a plan that I can actually accomplish and you all can get on board with? So if 5 million is the dollar amount we're desperately in need of, 10 years is more of a feasible amount of time to pay that back into the fund. Sure. Come again?
We'll have to have additional discussion, because I don't think I'd support 10 years for 5 million.
Yeah, but it's still tied to the dollar, the years are tied to the dollar amount in which is being loaned out of the resilience fund. I mean, technically, we're loaning this money to ourselves for an emergency purpose. So logically, what is the dollar amount that you can pay back in a 2-year period of time? Or however long you want to talk about. Ms. Kyle.
I don't like to put anybody on the spot, but Kara, you're the financial wizard. You more than we would understand how long it would take the city to pay back any $1 million debt. I mean, and like Rebecca says, there's so many different scenarios that, where we could use this money, or where we might have to use the money, I should say, that, the dollar amount's going to depend on that. We might get paid back really fast by the government. In that case, no problem. But what if the government didn't pay us back and we got to pay this money back? How long do you see, what would your advice be? Because, like I said, you deal with these numbers every day. We don't.
I think I'd like to answer that for her. I don't think she'd be able to run the numbers. It's going to be situational. Of course, we have a huge budget, that could be manipulated in so many different ways. So I don't think she could probably come up with, a blanket type of answer that would be good for every different situation that would arise without specifics.
Ms. Nicely.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep my thoughts together. I think we've all had some great ideas, and I've just been sitting here jotting down things. Jennifer, I really like your plan of action. I'm really concerned when we're putting such a small number of years to repay it back, of cutting back the budget of first responders and services to our citizens. So I'm for maybe if we need to readjust the payback period, giving it some thought, because I don't want to take out of the budget of not doing leave pickup. I think that's a great service, and I sure don't want to take from the police, fire, and EMT because they protect us and we need that, and we know they have a growing budget that's beyond their control. So I don't want to have to support taking so much out of their budget and the services we provide, because I think that's what sets us apart in Erlanger. We do have good services. Thank you.
Any other comments? I do want to I want to pull up something really quick. Hold, please. This conversation has had a lot of doom and gloom and what ifs and terrible things happening, and I kind of want to just bring it back to the reality of the situation that we're doing phenomenally. Our city is extremely fiscally strong, and this $5 million is on top of the $5.3 million that we have for emergency reserves, which is 30% of our appropriations. And then that's on top of the $3 to $4 million that we have in unrestricted reserves. So I want to make sure that we bring ourselves back into right now, the present, and not leave this meeting with just the doom and gloom and the worry, because that's really not, yes, we have to focus on that kind of stuff at times, but the reality is we are very fiscally strong, and Kara takes very good care of our financials. So, is there any other discussion on this matter? Mr. Hermes.
I know Ms. Recker says that we need to talk about it more. I like Mrs. Jasper Lucas's idea as well. Tying the timeline to the amount that's taken from the fund, I think is a very good idea. And I think maybe it might help ease Mrs. Recker's mind if we said that the payback had to be, instead of just saying that it's $5 million over 10 years, that it's paid down at an equal rate. If it's going to be paying back $1 million, or I'm sorry, paying back $500,000. What am I trying to say? Yeah, $500,000 each year to be able to get back to that $5 million mark. I think that a payback like that, if we were to go, 2 or 3 years and need to dip into the resilience fund again, God forbid, that there would be something there. We know there's going to be something there then. So, that would make me feel a lot better. And I think that if we were all to talk about a way to repay $1 million in 2 years, I think all of us would have a sheet full of ideas. There's many, many ways of doing that. So, yeah, I would be in favor of Mrs. Jasper Lucas's plan.
Okay. Any further discussion? Is this something that we want to discuss further, or Mr. Skidmore?
That $5 million, and I like Jasper's idea, but I think a 1-year payback plan on $1 million, and on $2 million, it would be a 2-year payback plan, and go on down 3 years on $3 million, 4 years on $4 million, and 5 years on $5 million. And even if you didn't take but $1.5 million between the first year and the second year, you would have 18 months in there. You know what I'm saying? So that was just a thought.
Yeah, it's I get what you're saying. It's just a speedier payback. it's how much can the budget absorb
Yeah.
each year to pay it back in those chunks.
I don't like the 10-year plan at all. I think it's too much of a turnover on council, mayor, and whatever to go into a 10-year plan.
Yeah. Okay. Do you believe there's further discussion? Do we want to, Ms. Reckers?
Well, if the plan is to make an adjustment to this timeline, I mean, I don't believe that there's agreement on, I don't support 10 years. I don't know if I support 5. I'd have to think about it and come up with a tactical, really working through like what that would look like. I'd like to hear Ms. Kramer's, opinion at some point, whether it's today or, at a future meeting on what the most optimal payback would look like from her point of view. But I definitely think 10 is too long. I mean, there's other factors that would come into place. If we would take out refunding bonds. Like if we're looking at a situation that's going to take Erlanger down for the count for 5 years due to a devastation, something like what happened in Mayfield. Like, we're going to look at bonds. We're going to look at other debt obligation to help the city to function. I feel like we're really micro-focused on, when I'm talking about like long-term devastation, Tyson, is what I'm saying, not one building or one element of our services being derailed due to a disaster of some sort. That could be repaid over a 2-year period and possibly sooner based on whatever the circumstances were. But if we had something that was like long-term devastation, like we're gonna have to look at other factors. It wouldn't be like, well, we got to pay I feel like this is being, we're failing to see the forest through the trees here. With regard, it's a very thoughtful legislation. It took months to craft. It took multiple discussions to have. I would support a shorter timeline. I don't know what that would look like. We need to have additional discussion, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, or have it tiered or something. But I feel like this does require additional discussion to hammer out those details if we're going to make an amendment to this particular ordinance. So, thank you.
Ms. Kyle?
Not to belabor this, but I just had a thought too. If you want to pay it back in a short amount of time, I remember when we built Flagship Park, we did not have the money for that. It was not in the budget, so we had to take out a bond. And we actually went into debt for that park and paid it back over so many years. The city could do that. You could take out a bond for whatever you owe and put it back in there and just pay it back. Now, it might be interest on that, but it's just a thought. But I do like Jennifer's idea. Depending on how much you take out, the shorter amount of time. And I also would like to hear Kara's thoughts at a later date, give her time to think it over, because I know it's kind of, it's a big budget and it's complicated. So, I mean, I personally, if I had to pay back $5 million in 2 years, I would just kill myself because I can't do it. But as a city, we have other options. So, and it depends on what we're doing. I mean, like someone said, if we have a disaster where the government's going to pay us back, because that was my first thought, grants and government aid, yeah, then you don't have to worry about it. You'll pay it back. But we don't know if that's going to be the scenario. We got to be prepared for every disaster, every kind of thing that could go wrong. When Toyota left us, that was a big downturn. Buddy, we had to cut big time. And that was scary. That's why I like this $5 million set aside, because we can still run the city, a lot on that $5 million. So, just a thought.
Jennifer?
I just want to say, I don't know that I like my idea, so don't give me too much credit for it. I'm just throwing something out there. But as I said, I also trust that future councils would make adjustments if needed, depending on the circumstances. So I'm not sure that I agree with 10 years for $5 million, but I'm willing to have one more discussion, and that's about how much I can tolerate on this matter.
But I hate to jump in on this, right? This is scary that I'm jumping in on this. But I think Ms. Jasper Lucas made an excellent point, that future councils, frankly, with each budget they pass, are going to determine what that repayment period is, right? Because if you remember, we put the park fund in the last 3 years in our budget ordinance. The reason we did that is because regardless of what ordinance we pass, right, there's always a section at the end which says conflicting ordinances are repealed. So each year, council's going to pass a budget that's either going to put this $5 million in, is not going to put the $5 million in. Each year, they spend the money or don't spend the money. They're going to put it in a budget or not. So I frankly have never really, and I'm not editorializing, I've never really understood a lot of this, because I think each year, and I think a lot of this, though, is good that it gives clarity from a fund perspective for the treasurer. I think this is all lofty ideas, but from a practical legal perspective, you know, we just amended our budget for, what, a 4th time this year? So this council now has acted 4 different times on a budget. And I think each council that passes a budget is either going to continue to follow this or not, and that future council is always going to have that provision, right? Because hypothetically, let's say in 2025, council comes in and says, we don't want to put this $5 million in the budget anymore. We want to move it to unreserved, or we want to move it to the park fund, or we want to move it to the police fund, or whatever they want to do. What's stopping them from doing that? Right? So again, I think this is like guidance to future councils, is probably what it is. But just understand that we will have to incorporate this guidance, just like we have the park fund, with every budget we pass. So every year, that new budget ordinance will include that fund. No different than this last budget amendment we did, right? This budget amendment still, I've said my piece, and I'm not trying to weigh in on this issue. I just want council to understand that really, with each budget that's passed, you're really kind of re-looking at this issue.
So you're saying no action is required?
Saying you all make those decisions. Okay. I'm just saying.
Yes.
Jack, if you put yourself in a mayor's position, would you be so bold to be the guy who got rid of that fund, the $5 million fund? And do you think that people wouldn't talk about that?
I don't think it would be up to the mayor to take out the fund. I think council would have that power.
It's up to the mayor to propose the budget, and it would start there.
Well, I'm with you on that. No, I think the mayor has to include this in their budget. 100% agree with you.
I mean,
I agree with that, sure.
You know, I've been mayor before.
100% agree.
I would never want to be the guy who gets the finger pointed at him and says, that guy wanted to remove that $5 million.
Right. I understand. I'm just saying from a practical perspective.
I'm just saying that you make it sound pretty easy, and I know it's not.
But council has the authority to come up with the budget. That is one of, frankly, the few powers that council has in the mayor-council form of government.
Council gets to approve the budget.
Agree, semantics. I mean, the mayor presents the budget, the executive branch presents the budget, sure.
Yeah.
I'm just saying from a practical perspective, we would need to include this in each budget.
You're right.
All right.
But to remove it is a lot harder than what you make it sound. You make it sound like everybody here gets along perfect, and everything's hunky-dory, and it's rainbows and unicorns.
No,
and we just decide
I didn't say that.
to take it out.
I think you and I've
You know that I've dealt with hostile members of council.
I'm not debating any of that. All I'm saying is from a purely legal perspective, a council can modify how they do the repayment. They can modify this ordinance. They can modify the budget at any time. Your point is, from a practical perspective, it would be a challenge for the mayor to take this fund out or to propose this in a budget.
Right.
That's a political situation. I was giving you a legal answer.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think there is still action that's required, and I do think that it can be solved very quickly with, this whole thing can be alleviated by adjusting the timeline. And I think that if this council is the one that created it, I think it's this council that can fix it just as easily.
And I would agree with you that it would be more likely for future councils or future mayors to follow something that would be possible. But I'm not making any legal opinion on the possibility of that. I don't deal with the finances here. I'm just saying a future council could modify this.
If we want to keep it, we should make it right.
Ms. Kramer?
So we've been in audit mode because our auditors come on Monday. So we've been dealing with actuals. So the next goal is for us to do projections. And we're hoping to have that by the end of November, December, and we will bring those to council. We will give a conservative approach and a rosy approach. And then after that, you guys will be able to hopefully have more discussion as what you guys want to do with this plan. But I will say that Erlanger is in great financial position. We have a contingency rainy day fund, and now we have this resilience fund. So I assure you all that we do have money in the bank, and we are doing great, and we have our park fund, and we have our capital asset fund, and we have a great internal and service fund to pay our employees health benefits. So just to keep you guys all in check that it is all great. So, but I will have those in November and December. So we'll look forward to this.
Ms. Nicely?
This will be the last time I talk tonight, I'm sorry. I think we've all had great ideas, and we could sit here for the rest of the night of what-if scenarios. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. Life, you don't have a crystal ball. I think we need to move on, put this to rest for now, because we're going to continue talking about it till the next budget comes, and when the next budget comes, if we'll still be on council, we can readdress it with different terms and amend it if we need to, but I think at this moment, we've been spending so much time on this that we need to put it aside for now, is my suggestion.
All right. So what are our marching orders? Talk about it again?
Sounds like Ms. Kramer is suggesting that we have a further discussion after we have the numbers and have a better understanding of the repayment plan. That's what I'm hearing.
Is that cool with everybody?
Which seems to make sense. No, I think she said she's not going to have those numbers till January.
January. No. All right. Ms. Jasper Lucas.
This is not related to this at all. I feel like at our last council meeting, or maybe last caucus meeting, we brought up the fact that November's council meeting is the same day as Election Day, and that we don't typically meet on that day. And I don't know if a decision has been made.
I think we only don't meet if we all have a council meeting. I think we've actually
don't
done
know.
like something different every year.
I think we have an ordinance that
Yeah.
You know, we did. We had it last year, frankly, on election night. We did, didn't we? Or a committee meeting?
No, it was last year. It was.
I thought we had one last year.
No,
I don't know.
it was during the primary.
Okay, it was a primary election
It
night.
was a
That's
primary
right.
election night.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I think we have an ordinance that specifies it. I know my cell phone's not working well.
I think we've been here when it's not us running, but then we're not here when it is us running, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't know. What do you guys want to do? I mean, we'd miss each other if we didn't come on November 7th.
I'd be okay not meeting.
Okay. Okay, so there might be not even the ability to get to a quorum, maybe?
I'm working the polls that day.
Okay.
I would have to, I mean, I make it my plan to get here by 7.
Yeah, but
so-
you
but
might not.
if I don't have to, I would like to know that ahead of time. That's all I'm saying. But I will get here if I need to.
And Sherry is feverishly trying to come up with the ordinance. Ms. Wilson? Okay, so.
We don't have it.
Word music. Okay. Yeah. Sure, let's just, I guess I need a motion and a second to cancel a regularly scheduled council meeting. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so, since the statute requires us to have a meeting. So, I mean, but we are having a meeting further in November. And the issue just would become, that might become a special meeting if there's anything that needs to, any business that needs to occur.
Oh, the 21st.
Yeah. Or is the 21st Thanksgiving week?
Yep.
Seems like election night might be better than Thanksgiving week, but hey, what do I know?
No meetings in November.
Again, it's one of those things in the KRS, and there's not really a penalty provision for not having a meeting in the month, but it actually does say that there needs to be monthly meetings, and I think that's really in deference to council. So I would make the recommendation we have at least a meeting in November. A special meeting
It
on
would
the 14th?
be a special meeting on the 14th.
When do the polls close?
6.
They close at 6.
Okay, so let's just eliminate the 7th and eliminate the 21st, and then we'll only have a special meeting on the 14th at 7 p.m.
I think we need a motion and a second for that one.
Ms. Reckers, Mr. Skidmore, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. One meeting for November 14th. Is everybody good?
And just to be clear, that will be a special meeting, so we'll be bound by what's on the agenda. I know we all know that. I just want to make sure that we basically have one special meeting in November.
Cool beans. All right, do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Reckers, Ms. Nicely, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Have a good evening.